shattered to unbreakable. Listen here, sweet sister. Whether you think you have one little crack or you are shattered into a billion pieces, this podcast is going to give you the resources, tools, and skills to help piece yourself back together to form a beautiful, unique, solid, and unbreakable masterpiece. You are listening to Shattered to Unbreakable, the Reclaim Podcast. Let's talk.
Great.
Okay, welcome guys to another episode of Shattered to Unbreakable. I'm your host, Brandy Babin, and I have Ann Kent here with me today, my very favorite dietitian with my very favorite meal planning app ever called Peas and Hoppiness. So this is an app that I have on my phone. It comes out with new meals every single week. It comes out with recipes that are simple and easy to do. And there's challenge meals. I love that you put that in there, Ann, like challenge meals, because takes a little more, it's a little harder, but I love them. Then there's 30-minute meals, there's crock pot meals, there's dietary needs meals, gluten-free meals, vegetarian meals, like everything you could think of is here. You can change the servings. It makes a shopping list. You can save your favorite recipes. I don't know what you didn't think of in this app. It's fabulous.
That's so kind. That means a lot. I'm so glad it's helping. Yay.
It is. And it's not that expensive. It's $14.99 a month. I think that's amazing to me. I love that price. And you guys get to try it for 30 days with the Reclaim 30 meal code. So you can go to Ann's website, sign up for 30 days free using the code Reclaim 30. So we'll put that in the show notes for you, but definitely give it a try, even if it's just for a couple weeks to try it out. And my kids honestly haven't balked at much that's in that. I mean, they're at first they're like, oh, because they just have. That's why we're doing this podcast. I have picky eaters. Maybe I should tell everyone what we're talking about. We're talking about picky eaters today because I am a mom of 4. They're all picky eaters, every last one of them. Well, my oldest son is actually not that bad. He'll eat anything I put in front of him. He's very sweet. And he'll eat all of it. And he'll say, thanks for making that, even if it's terrible. So that's him. But the rest of them don't even want to sit down to dinner. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why on this podcast and what I can do to make mealtime less stressful for them and for me as the parent. So with that being said, Ann, take it away. What are we going to start talking about today?
Well, you are not alone. And thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. Yes. So I think picky eating is one of the top concerns that I hear from families. I make the meal planning app to make mealtime easier. That is my goal. And picky eating makes it really, really difficult. So as I was preparing for this conversation and thinking about it, I think that there's 2 major things that I hope your listeners come away from this, because there is so much about picky eating. It is so nuanced. It's so complex. But the 2 things I would love your listeners to take away and incorporate with their picky eaters. Number 1 is understanding the importance of autonomy, even in your kids. Autonomy is this basic human need that we need, and kids need it too. And then number 2, it's so important to allow your children the freedom to change, because we change over our lifetime, and it's very common to not like something once, but then to like it in the future. And if we accidentally squelch that, we might cause picky eating that otherwise would not have existed. So
that's so
allowing
important.
your children, yes, that freedom to change.
Oh, it's so good because we change all the time. I'll really be craving something one day and the next day I'm like, absolutely not. Sometimes I'm in the mood for sushi and I can't think of anything else. I'm like, I really don't want anything but sushi today. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, no, sushi sounds awful. So, yeah.
And how hard would that be if you're a small child and you don't even have the language to be able to say that? And then someone puts something in front of you and you're like, no, I don't want that. But your parent is like, no, you have to eat that. So that's where that autonomy comes in, that it's so important to allow them the freedom to say no to something. And this is actually a nod to a concept called the division of duty that was developed by a registered dietitian named Ellen Satter. She has done a lot of research about this, but the division of duty speaks about the relationship between the parent and the child when it comes to food. So it's the adult or the parent's job to decide what, where, and when to eat. And it's the child's job to decide if and how much. So this is a nod to that autonomy that the child needs to have. And it's a way to encourage their innate intuitive eater that they were born with, while also allowing the parent to be able to set some age appropriate and developmentally appropriate boundaries around food.
Right.
It's not necessarily appropriate to let your 4-year-old just go in the pantry and like decide what's for dinner, but they
Right.
should have the ability to listen to their hunger cues and their fullness cues and decide when they are full and need to stop eating.
That's so good. I love that because, yeah, as an adult, if somebody just put something in front of me and was like, you have to eat this before you can get up from the table, I'd be like, uh, no, I don't want to. And it could make you sick. And I've experienced, when I was a kid, there was a time
Yeah,
I was forced to eat tomato soup. And it was like, I just kept eating it and eating it. And she was like, you can't get up till you eat this. And I gagged like 3 times. And she was like spoon feeding it to me. And I know for a fact that my kids have gone through this, being forced to sit through a meal and eat it even if they're gagging, and like at some points they've even thrown up on their plate because they were forced to eat something. So I know that this is happening in their life and there's nothing I can do about it because it's away from the home. But yes, I feel like, if I can help them at my house be a little less stressed over mealtime and giving them the autonomy to say, how much am I going to eat, or am I going to eat at all? And then I've just explained the difference. Like, well, if you don't choose to eat right now, you can eat this later, but then it'll be close to bedtime. It might affect the way you sleep. It might make it longer for you to fall asleep. If you don't eat and you don't eat before bedtime, you might wake up in the middle of the night hungry. Like, these are all things that might happen if you choose this.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and of course, depending on your child's age, they're able to understand cause and effect a little bit better. And so, I mean, we're gonna like shift this boundary a little bit depending on what their age is. And the
That's
older they
true.
are, the more autonomy they get with like choosing snacks. My teenager who's 15, he makes his own snacks. He understands what he needs, and we've already done this. But I still decide what's for dinner. My
Right.
toddler, I'm giving him options for snacks. I will say that like the autonomy aspect is a little bit different maybe than I like originally thought. I actually give my toddler more choice than I thought I would before. In the before times, before I had a toddler and a parent, I thought that I would just give him these two options and he would choose A or option B. And it turns out toddlers don't do that about anything in life. So why would they do that about food?
Right. That makes sense.
So, right. So I usually, do like a little bit of a hybrid when we're talking about like the what is for dinner. I decide our family's menus. I am deciding how I'm shopping and what we have in the house.
Yeah.
But I always make sure that he has several options for his safe food. And I will often ask him what he wants for his safe food. I'm not sure if I've explained what a safe food
No,
is.
yeah, I was
So,
just going to say,
um,
tell us about safe foods because I didn't know what you were talking about before
mhm,
when we did a little chatting before we started, but I didn't know what that meant, the safe food. And so, yeah, explain that
yeah.
because I think it's really cool.
Yeah. So, okay. So if the parent's job is to decide what to eat, sometimes there's going to be nothing on that plate that is recognizable or known to the child. And so a safe food is basically something that you as the parent know that they've eaten before, that they like, that they have the option of eating in case they don't like anything else on the plate. And this is important because picky eating is actually a biologically normal phase that children go through in development. It's thought that this originated back when we were hunter gatherer people. That if your child, once they started walking, they could wander off and eat some poison berries. And so it was really important that they had this mechanism that said, ooh, bitter means poison. I need to spit this out. And unfortunately, in our modern world, we don't really need that anymore, but that is still there. Children actually have more bitter taste receptors on their tongue than we do as an adult. So
That's so
they are,
crazy.
I know, right? Like, yeah, which I think is also helpful to understand. Like, there's biology playing into this, and so your child is not being bad because they don't want their broccoli. They literally perceive it as less tasty than you might. And so it's really important that's part of the reason why it's so important to not force them to eat something, because they're having a different experience than you are. And it's
Mm,
also the reason those bitter taste receptors and that whole biology stuff, that's why it takes so many exposures to a food before they can really decide whether or not it's safe. And that's where that second point that I was talking about, allowing them the freedom to change, comes in.
Yeah.
If you offer them the broccoli and they're like, ugh, no, I don't like it, and you say, oh no, my child's a picky eater and they don't like broccoli, especially if you say that out loud and to them, they're going to
Oh.
internalize it. They're going to hear it. You're not going to offer them broccoli, where actually they will like broccoli. It's just going to be on like the fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh time that you offer it to them. It's
That's
probably
such a
not
good
going to
point.
be the
Oh, I
first
love
time.
that. Yeah.
It's true with a lot of foods too. I mean, um, especially like combination foods, like there are some things that are just going to be harder for your child to like on the first try. There's
Right.
some things that I make and I'm like, oh yeah, my toddler's going to love this. Sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong. And then like vice versa, sometimes I make something and I'm like, I better make sure we really have a safe food here because I don't know if he's going to do this. And then he like eats a plate full.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I've noticed like if my kids are like, I don't want to eat this, I always just say, I'm like, be respectful, thank us for cooking. But if you
mhm,
don't want to eat it, and this is all from your episode before when you were talking about, you just touched on picky eating, but you were more so talking about intuitive eating, which
mhm,
I love. And if you haven't heard that episode, please go listen to it because your kids do what you do. And if you're not intuitively eating, they're not going to either. The more is caught than taught.
mhm,
I always say that. But we were talking about that. And so ever since that episode, I don't force them to eat anything on their plate. I just say, this is what I would like to happen, but you have the choice. And if they say, I don't like any of this, and then I say, but are you hungry? And they say yes. And then our safe food is yogurt with granola. And they all like that.
right.
So
That's
they'll able,
fantastic.
yeah, they'll eat that.
Yeah, that's a really great example. Somebody asked me recently, like, what are the safe foods that I offer my toddler? And so I sort of have like, I don't know, I have maybe like five different ones that are kind of my go to. My
Mm-hmm.
first criteria for a safe food is something that I don't have to cook. I am
Yeah.
not going to cook two different meals. I know that there are parents who do that. I think it leads to burnout, quite frankly, and is not really a great thing. And
It's
so I
hard
would
enough
really
to make
encourage.
one.
Right. I know. I'm like, I can't imagine cooking two meals. So,
Yeah.
like, sometimes I will maybe make some mac and cheese to go alongside our meal if I know, like, and I will incorporate it. And, like, that would be an example of a safe food.
Okay.
But the safe foods that I usually go to are cereal, they are yogurt, they are cheese. Usually I have like a protein. He loves all kinds of berries. So if we have
Mm,
like a vegetable that he's not into, I usually do a fruit instead because it has a lot of the same like vitamins and minerals.
yeah.
And actually bonus that it also has some carbohydrates because he's growing and needs that too. So when I choose a safe food, I usually kind of think of yeah, it's primarily what is convenient for me, and then
Right.
number two, what is good for
If
him,
they'll like it.
and then as like a third criteria, it's I do also think about the nutrition that he's had earlier in the day. So I'll kind of
Okay.
steer him towards like a really good example would be if he's like, I want blueberries. And I'm like, yeah, you've had blueberries for two of the last three meals. I
Mm-hmm.
know that if you eat more blueberries, your tummy is going to be really upset. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to set a boundary around that. It's like a safety boundary essentially. And that's how I would encourage you to think about it instead of like a food boundary necessarily. But you as a
Yeah.
parent are constantly setting boundaries for your kids. It's not bad to set food boundaries. It's bad when we get in the way of their autonomy um, in a way that's harmful. So I'm
Right.
protecting him by saying, no, you can't have another bowl of
Right.
blueberries because this is going to be harmful to you. So your choices then are cereal or yogurt.
Yep. That's
And
happened with halos at my house. They will eat halos like it's going out of style. And I'm like, on the fourth halo, I'm like, hey, halo, don't eat that. Like, that you're going to have a pooping experience if you don't
right,
stop. Like, your tummy's going to hurt. It's going to, yeah. So I
yeah,
totally get
yeah.
that.
And we have to do that for our kids because they don't have that brain development yet of like seeing into the future. They're present now, and of course that
Yeah.
changes as they get older, but that's part of it. It's a fine line. It's a dance. You're not going to get it right all the time, but the more lead with this, focus on
Mm-hmm.
this, the easier it's going to be.
Right. And I love how your app helps because, well, growing up as a kid, like, it's not that we didn't have good food. I mean, we always had meals. And it's so funny you mentioned cereal as a safe food. It still is my safe food. And it was when I was a kid and a teenager, and it still is now. I love cereal. Like, if I just don't know what to eat, I love my basic four. is what I get because it has all the nutrients in it. I'm like, I want my basic four. And then I have my lactate because now I'm lactose intolerant apparently. I think I always was, but where was I going with this? Oh, when I was a kid, it was kind of always the same meals over and over again. It was like meatloaf and then elk steak and then mac and cheese with fish sticks and then meatloaf and then roast and then mac and cheese with fish sticks and then meatloaf and I was just like,
Oh, I think I heard you say that you're not a real big fan of meat, and I think I might understand why now.
yeah, I really it hurts my stomach now too. I can't digest it well without
Mm,
enzymes. I have to take enzymes, and I feel like, well, maybe I'm just getting old. But now I'm kind of realizing maybe I've always had a bit of an intolerance to meat. And my daughter's the
mm.
same way. She hates meat. We both hate chicken unless it's like the. I love that you always have chicken thighs in your recipes because they're the dark meat and it's easier for me to eat. The other chicken's too dry. But
Oh,
yeah,
that's
I
so
don't know where I was going
interesting.
with that. Other
Yeah.
than the meal, yeah, the meals that you make. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So if you as a parent aren't used to cooking
Hmm.
diversely, I guess, and you're just used to making the same go-to things. We used to have Taco Tuesday. I thought my kids loved it. And then finally one day they were like, we don't want this every Tuesday. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that. So then we changed it up
Right.
like then burritos or maybe tostadas. And then it got to be like, we don't want Mexican food on Tuesdays. Okay, we don't have to do that. So it was just the monotony I thought was enjoyable, like a tradition. They actually
Hmm.
didn't like it, which was interesting to me. But the app has helped guide me through diversity and
Oh,
introducing, like you said, exposures. And you were saying before it's like 7 to 20 exposures, and it doesn't even
hmm.
have to be on the tongue. So you
Yes.
should talk about that a little bit because that was really neat to hear.
Yeah. So when we're talking about like, okay, your kid might not like this and the freedom to change, they've done a lot of research with how many times you have to taste something, and the research shows that it's between 7 and 20 times of trying something before your brain can really say, oh yes, this is not a poison berry. I am safe eating that. The good news about exposures is that it does not have to be the child eating the food, because pressuring them to eat the food can actually backfire in the long run.
Mm,
And so an exposure could be watching mom and dad enjoy this food or seeing it on their plate, or even like the closer they get to eating it, the better. So if they're like at least playing with it on their tray, at least they're like, allowing it near them, that's better
yeah.
than if it's just on the table. If they put it in their mouth and spit it out, that's an exposure. That's a win. All of those things are wins. And so I want to maybe reframe this a little bit. If you're giving your child a food and they're saying no, I think a lot of times as a parent that feels like a failure because they didn't eat it, but it's
Right.
actually a win because you just gained another exposure. You're getting points. It's like you're
Okay, I
going to
love
level
that.
up in the game,
Oh,
in the
I
picky
love
eating
it.
game.
Yeah.
So
And
count that. And again, coming at this from both a professional perspective but also personal, raising my toddler, the way I cook is we often have a meal and then we will have leftovers for several meals. And
mm-hmm.
I am shocked at how many times the first time we have the dinner, my toddler will not even allow the food on his tray. He's like trying to throw it off, and I'm like, no, hand it to me in this bowl. Like, don't put it on
Don't
the
throw
floor.
it.
Yeah. We're just, surviving. But then, like the second time or the third time I serve it, all of a sudden he eats like an entire plate. And I am like trying to hide
Huh?
my shocked face and play it cool because that is such an important part of allowing your picky eater to change.
Yeah.
Don't react either positively or negatively. I think a lot of times we want to celebrate when they're eating something, but
Mm,
if you celebrate it, you're inadvertently giving a moral hierarchy to food. This is
okay,
a
yeah.
crazy thing. So your child finishes the broccoli and you're like, yeah, you ate your broccoli. This is so amazing. And then they eat the brownie and you're like, okay, that's enough brownie. Those are two wildly different reactions, and your child notices that. So better to be neutral, play it cool,
Yeah.
and let them explore.
That's so true. And we talked about the last time you were on, we talked about serving dessert with dinner, and this has become a really
Mm.
big deal in my house. So I definitely want to talk about it. They do, we are a divorced family, so they go to their dad's house and they come here. It's very different atmospheres as far as food goes. I do know at their dad's house they get more desserts, which is fine. Here we just don't keep a lot of sugar in the house. Like Corey isn't a sugar fan and I'm trying not to be, so I just don't like it to be here. So we don't even have a lot of dessert. So that when it is here, my kids are like pouncing on it, like, and I can't get them to eat their dinner before dessert. And I'm hearing maybe I don't have to. And so you tell us about the idea. And like, I know that you and your husband just talked about this, and we're like, we wouldn't believe it unless we saw it. And so I want to start trying it, but also maybe give us some tips on like desserts that aren't desserts that I could keep at the
Mhm.
house, maybe.
Sure. This is such a good example of inadvertently putting foods on a moral hierarchy when we don't need to. The idea of you need to finish your plate before you get dessert. I think a lot of times, like as a parent, you're coming at this, and the reason for this is because you want your child to have nourishment. You want to make sure that they're getting in all of the nutrition they need before they have this fun, sweet thing. But inadvertently, what you're telling them is that this food is not as exciting. It's necessary and functional, but not as
Mm-hmm.
fun. And this dessert is amazing and enticing. And just and that emotion, we've all felt it as adults. When something is off limits, you want it more. That's just like a human nature thing. So the idea, now it's actually recommended that parents serve dessert with dinner, and to take the that morality out of it. And it is such a crazy thing
Yeah,
because my toddler
that's,
is
I'm excited for that.
he has discovered, yeah, that like lowering the morality of it. I mean, I think a lot of us come into that like with our own, we have our own diet culture stuff, we have our own junk that we're wading through. And I think a lot of it is that, you know we get a lot of messages about sugar, how bad it is, and it's not all false, but the morality of food is false. So
Mm,
that's what I guess I want to differentiate. As an intuitive eating dietitian, I want to take that morality out of it. You should not feel guilty about what you eat, whether it's nutritious or maybe less nutritious. Like, guilt is not a helpful feeling when we're talking about
right.
eating. Um, there is a nutritional difference to food, and we can talk about that. But the studies with toddlers is that when you are providing them a variety of food, all of the different food groups, over the course of a month, they will actually eat a balanced diet if you allow them access to all the things. So I know that professionally. And then recently we've been experiencing this personally with my toddler when he's been asking for chocolate chips or asking for the chocolate with his meal. It is so funny. Just yesterday, I took a video of him. He had, I think we were having lunch, and it was like soup and his chocolate chips that he asked for, and his raisins and his zucchini. And he had eaten everything. He had asked for more chocolate chips, and I gave him more chocolate chips because anytime he asks for more of something, I give it to him unless we're like out, unless there's like an
Yeah.
actual reason why I don't have it. Um, and so I was like, oh, this is such a bummer. He's not going to eat any of his zucchini. And then he stopped eating his chocolate chips, and he was like, my zucchini. And he like picks up his fork and like eats the zucchini. And I'm like, play it cool. I can't believe this is happening. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Don't
Like,
react. Don't
it's
react.
happening. The whole dessert, vegetable, it's so it can happen. So I want to balance saying that with also, I do also have a strong belief that it is really important to lead with the nutritious foods.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say that because we live in a world of hyper palatable foods
Yeah.
and convenience foods. It takes a lot to be a parent. Like, I don't have to tell you or any of your listeners like how hard
Mm-hmm.
it is and how exhausting and all the things. And so it is super easy to rely a lot on like the packaged convenient foods.
Yeah.
The challenge with that, the problem is that most of those foods have been, if it most of the time, if it's hyper ultra processed, it's been engineered to what's called the bliss point, which is literally the
Ooh.
scientific point, the balance between sugar, salt, and fat that makes all of your taste buds light up. There is
Interesting.
not a food in nature that can compare to that bliss point.
Mm.
So, as we're introducing foods to our children, it's so important to feed them those whole foods and the fruits and
Yeah.
vegetables and the proteins, like the stuff that you are cooking, because we want to train their palates to enjoy and like those foods. If we're always going to the chicken nuggets or we're always going to the Kraft mac and cheese, then we're training their palates to expect something that
Mm.
fruits and vegetables will not be able to give them.
That makes so much sense.
I don't want to demonize any of these foods. We have Kraft mac and cheese in my pantry. We literally had it like yesterday for lunch. So we incorporate them too. It's not that you should never have fish sticks or chicken nuggets or whatever. It's that I think of these a little bit more as safe foods than I would as like your plan A. Like this is like your plan B or C when you like need a break or like, you know, things are super stressful. You just need to have a
Yeah.
backup plan. And that's part of why I created the app too, to give you some of those plan A materials. Like start with the whole foods, incorporate some of these other things like as you love, but it is really important to give your kids exposure to a lot of different flavors if you want them to move through the picky eating phase.
Thanks for listening, you guys. I wanted to let you know our website has changed. Our new website is called thereclaimstrategy.com. I think it is so fitting. We also have a whole university full of free courses and downloads. So please go check that out. It's called the Reclaim University or Reclaim You. I thought of it all by myself. So proud. And so hop on there and download some resources. Also, I would love for you to share this podcast. The more women we can get in front of, the more women we can save, and the more children we can affect. I love you guys. Stay sparkly. I'll see you next week.